Today on the river, living the St. Lawrence. The guys have a remote conversation with a retired Canadian broadcast executive. Derek Berghuis talks about growing up on the river in Brockville, Ontario.
So we've all been here. I'm 60 years old. I've never missed a summer.
He also shares stories about his radio career, life on the river, and life after COVID.
It's very positive. I mean, it's fishing, it's vacationing, it's second homes for families who are spending more and more time here.
And what's up with the low water levels?
I think navigation is fine for now, but if it gets much lower, it does become an issue.
That's today on this episode of The River, Living the St. Lawrence. Derek Berghuis loves talking about the St. Lawrence. He grew up on the St. Lawrence. His family owns an island on it. Let's join in the conversation.
So, first of all, Mr. Berghuis, I'm very happy to have you. I've been talking with Derek for, I dare say, 5 years now. I'm glad we are able to connect. We want to get a little bit about your storied history, both in the U.S. and the Canadian side. And if you want to talk about a little bit of Brockville, the radio past you've got.
Sure, Josh. I think the history goes way back. On my mother's side, the family was from a small town called Weston, Massachusetts. Now a suburb of Boston. And around 1776, most family members were not enamored of the rebellion that you folks were having down there. So they hightailed it north, and they were called UELs, United Empire Loyalists, loyal to King George. And they came north and got land in the St. Lawrence Valley. So we've been up here for more generations than I can count. They actually settled both sides. So during the War of 1812, family members fought each other. But one of the families that came up, ancestors, they were one of the founding families of Brockville. And so it's a lot of history for us here. The property that I'm talking from right now, so land that my great-grandmother purchased in 1899, 122 years ago. And they were from Montreal at that point. And I often would ask in the family, well, they must have been very wealthy. This is about 2,000 or 3,000 feet of frontage. Well, they weren't wealthy. They were upper middle class. But in 1899, this was like in the middle of the North Pole. It was that remote. There was no 401 highway. There were no cars. But anyway, here we are. I'm fourth generation on the property, and my kids, who are now in their 20s, are the fifth generation here in the Thousand Islands along the Canadian mainland. So we've all been here. I'm 60 years old. I've never missed a summer, but you learn something new every day. It's the first time I've ever spent a winter here. I've passed through different parts of the year in the past, but I've never lived here through a winter before, as we did this past winter.
Derek, if I could just jump in real quick. Good to meet you, Alex Hammond. Could you just give me, I guess, and possibly Glenn, your story? So as far as, where you grew up mostly and what you did for a career for most of your life.
Sure. I was born in Montreal, like many English Canadians, and was part of the Exodus. We moved to Toronto in '67 as a family. I was 7 years old, and that was when it was starting to be very uncomfortable for English-speaking people in the province of Quebec. So I was raised really mostly in Toronto, not leaving Montreal at the age of 7. And then I grew up on the water here, and it's just so many fun memories from my high school years and college years, bringing my friends here. A lot of it was, juvenile fun on the river that we all had at a young age. But when I go back to my college reunions in the U.S. every 5 years, I can't walk for 20 minutes without having somebody stop me and just say, Derek, what an amazing time we had up there in the Thousand Islands, you know, 40 some odd years ago. I was in the broadcasting business, did that at college, with the college radio station. Didn't study radio. I was majored in economics, but worked at the college station, and then started my radio career with CFJR Radio in Brockville, Ontario. And Glenn will know what AM radio stations were like back then. This is a class 4, 1,000 watt AM station, Radio 145.
Yeah.
Seaway Valley with 1,000 watts that sound like a million, and I did not write that liner. A lot of people would go through these small radio stations and start their careers. I was there for 2 summers. I was doing some on-air work at night from 6 till midnight, but mostly I was doing sales, radio ad sales. And then I went on after college to work at the Wall Street Journal in New York, helped them launch a radio network, and then on to business school after that. And then I was 8 years at ABC Radio in New York before moving back to Toronto in '95 and helping build Canada's first all-news radio station.
Wow.
80 News. I was the VP-GM of that station. It was a tiny station when we turned off the music and turned on the all-news. And I was told that all news will never work in Canada. They're like, it's an American format. City or Chicago format. It's not going to work here. Well, we would become the #1 station in Canada at about, it took about 10 years to get there. It still is the #1 billing radio station in Canada. I also managed the sports station and eventually sales for the 54 station chain. I was Rogers Broadcasting in Toronto, and I'm happily retired now and able to spend more time on the St. Lawrence. But I do drive by CFJR Radio in Brockville all the time, where I started. And I was talking earlier with Glenn about some of the people who went through that radio station, and I would see them in different places in Toronto and New York, and they would all ask about what's happening on the river, what's happening down at Blockhouse Island. There's a certain restaurant still in Brockville, and one was Peter Jennings, and I knew him a little bit. I was at ABC Radio, and he did some work on the radio for us. He was spending most of his time on World News Tonight, and I would bring our affiliates over to meet him. When we had the affiliated stations from across the country coming into New York, it would be a kind of a highlight for them to go over to the World News Tonight set and meet Peter Jennings. And one of my friends from Brockville he's a retired lawyer now, but he was the overnight guy on CFJR Radio, and he really wanted to meet Peter Jennings. So over we went, and Jennings couldn't have been nicer. And before the broadcast, every break, he would turn around in his swivel chair and pepper my friend with questions about Brockville and the river. And it was back, I think, 2001. CFJR Radio celebrated its 75th anniversary. And I was in Toronto at 680 News at the time. I had a call from the program director down here saying, Derek, do you think we could get Peter Jennings to do a little birthday greeting for us? And I said, well, let me send him a note. And I got a note back instantly from Jennings saying, Derek, you tell me what they want. I'll do anything. And he spent a whole hour on the radio with Brockville, just talking about, the river and his memories of his 2 years in this town when he started his career. So it's just a lot of us started here, but for me, it's not just about a career. It's a land that, we're all born around here and raised on the river, and kind of consider ourselves river rats. Mm-hmm. We expanded. I got to know Josh a little bit through our island on the U.S. side. And that was just something that's my generation. And there happened to be an island for sale. And I guess I was in my mid-20s to late 20s. And it's American Island. It's St. Lawrence County, New York. It's about 25 feet into St. Lawrence County. It's about an 8-minute boat ride from our dock on the Canadian side. And that was my siblings and cousins. There were 7 up, and it was going to be auctioned off. This was owned by a Canadian family, and they were leaving the area. So we put a bidding strategy together, and we thought it was going to go for a lot more than it did. And that's why we had 7 people involved, and we got it for what we thought was a very reasonable price. And put it this way, St. Lawrence County, when the first tax assessment came in, we said it's not worth what you say it is. It's worth 25% of that. And we proved it with the auction documents, and we were quite pleased. So it's a 5.8 acre island. It's unbuilt. It's just got a dock there in the middle of the St. Lawrence, and it's got a beautiful, almost a 360 view of the river.
Derek, I have a question, and it's funny. I did a project for the village of Cape Vincent about maybe 15, 16 years ago, and we were talking about Kingston. It's a 400-plus-year-old city. It's an incredible place. It's like going to Europe, except you're not crossing the pond. Would you say that Kingston, Gananoque, for that matter, the Thousand Islands and the river itself, is the Miami to Canada, like Miami is to America, because it's the southernmost part?
Yeah, I don't think so, because it's a vacation area that most of my friends in Toronto know very, very little about Thousand Islands. They know there are a few exits on the 401 if they drive to Montreal or drive to Ottawa.
Right.
It's a cottage area. Most Torontonians have their cottages. We use the term cottage. I think Americans use the term camp. We have our cottages mostly in Georgian Bay, Muskoka for Torontonians. People from Ottawa can go in any direction. That's just an hour and 10 minutes from where I am. But so there's some Ottawa people here. A fair number of Montreal people came up here. The Miami, the warmest spot in Toronto, in Canada, is actually Victoria, British Columbia. So quite a few people I know would retire in Victoria, BC, just because of climate out there if they want to stay in Canada.
It's unfortunate that people from the largest city, Toronto, aren't familiar with that. And why is that the case, Derek?
Distance. If there's no traffic to our cottage, it's 3 hours and 15 minutes. And to a lot of cottage areas, Torontonians can get there in sort of 2 to 2.5 hours, not 3.5. It could be, if there's traffic, it could be 4 hours to get down to Brockville from Toronto. So it's really, it's proximity more than anything else. I do think it's starting to change. In the past 3 years, property values have absolutely zoomed here on the Canadian side. And for many years, it was just flat, 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 whereas the property prices north of Toronto skyrocketed with Toronto prices. Just got so expensive, poor old grandmothers were knocked out of their houses because they couldn't pay their property taxes. And we were fortunate, our land values did not go up. But I think it's finally being discovered. There are quite a few Toronto people moving here, retiring in Toronto. And to pay up here, it means nothing to them if they're selling their house in central Toronto for anywhere from $3 to $7 million.
Wow.
Houses in central Toronto go for now. And if
Wow.
you bought your house 25 years ago for $700,000 and you're now selling it for $7 million, so you overpay in Brockville or Gananoque, whoop-de-doo. I mean, they don't. So prices are just soaring on this side of the river right now, and it's because of people from Toronto. But that is a very recent, this last 2-3 years that's been happening, and the pandemic has turbocharged that.
No doubt, guys. We've seen the same thing here. I mean, we were talking about it in the previous show, and that there is, I hate to say this, guys, a silver lining, if you will, because people living in the New York City area, Philadelphia, Rochester for that matter, and they look at quality waterfront property and they realize I can get that for less than $500,000, unsight unseen, I'll buy it. So we've seen the same thing on this side of the border of the river as well, Derek.
No doubt, because everybody's working remotely. So it certainly adds to the local economy just to have people remote working and even just spending time here. It's, Brockville's not the strongest economy. I think it's stronger than the U.S. side because it's on the 401 corridor between Toronto and Montreal. So I think by definition, there's just more industry here, but it's still not exactly, small town Ontario. It's not exactly, Toronto drives the Ontario economy.
Yes.
Not the smaller towns.
Abu Garcia declared about 3-4 months ago in March, they said St. Lawrence and Eastern Lake Ontario, the best fishing in the country.
I did read that because I like to read the newspapers on the other side of the river just to know what's going on both sides. And believe me, we do know about it because at 6 a.m. on Saturday mornings, we hear I think the boats come out of either Waddington or Messina or Ogdensburg, and they have to get their fishing spots, and they go racing up the Canadian Channel. And I think they have to fish on the U.S. side, but they move very fast upriver at 6 a.m.
Some time ago, and Derek, you can reflect on this, we had what was called the goby fish. We had other invasive species like the zebra mussels, the cormorants. Again, all these things, and Josh can attest to this, they came over by way of ships from other countries like Russia and China. And 25 years ago, guys, that was a big threat to the fishing industry. So, what's going to happen here? 25 years later, the fish are bigger, the water's cleaner, And it looks like we're going to have more fishing than ever before, guys.
I think that's right, and it's kind of through the cormorants that we met, Josh. On the U.S. side, the Americans were a little concerned with what was happening to our island, and we knew that we had a cormorant problem there, and had a call from New York State Wildlife saying, we could help you with the issue, and we were able to get a depredation permit. And then, of course, with the shooting on the island, a Canadian cottager called 911 and said they're shooting on American Island. It's not hunting season.
Right.
Go check it out. And they said, well, it's the U.S. side. So, of course, the U.S. Border Patrol comes racing out to the island. And our guy from Ogdensburg is a former U.S. Navy guy and ornery river guide. He's a fishing guide. And the Border Patrol, as I understand the story, it comes on the island and says, we have reports of gunfire on the island, sir. And our guy Bob says, well, that's what happens when you have guns. Yes. And then the Border Patrol officers said, could we use this island for a little surveillance from time to time? And then we kind of connected with Border Patrol at that time. But the cormorants were kind of an introduction to the New York State Wildlife and then effectively U.S. Border Patrol, just how it worked out. So there's a lot of fishing right around American Island.
Well, Derek, do you miss the broadcasting business? I have to ask you that.
I absolutely do. I love the day-to-day of my years at ABC and building a little all-news station in Toronto that would eventually be the highest cuming station, and I'd get in huge fights, Glenn, with my bosses at times because I would write some of the liners, and one of my favorites was. Just before the top of the hour, thank you for making 680 News Canada's #1 radio station. 680 News Time, 12 noon. And my boss would come to me, and he's the head of the FMs, and you can't say that. You're not #1. What makes you think you're #1? Our FM is #1 in share, and we had the highest revenue. I said, well, how do you say #1? I mean, isn't #1 money, or is it? So we had a great time. I had great colleagues, and I really enjoyed visiting some of the small towns across Canada as well, because in my role heading up sales, I got to see some parts of the country like Lethbridge, Alberta, and Brandon, British Columbia, places I would never ever get a chance to see. I just loved it, and sometimes we lament sort of where things have gone, but it's still a lot of people listen to the radio. It's probably been the strongest of all the traditional media. Newspapers and television are having a very tough time. Magazines, terrible. Local radio, there's nothing like local radio, and especially when something goes wrong. And in Brockville, it was the ice storm back in, I think, about 20 years ago, that you would have had that in upstate New York as well. And I know Bruce Wiley, who still does a local show in Brockville on CFJR, it's now JR 104.9, the highest award from the Canadian Association of Broadcasters for his coverage of that giant ice storm that hit this part of the world many years ago.
Went from Rochester right up to Montreal, and Montreal got hit probably worse than everybody. Derek, I just remember the power lines that went down from all the weight of the ice back in January of that year.
I'll never forget that. I was a year and a half old.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Alex was a year and a half old in 1998. Go figure. That seems like yesterday.
I remember 2 inches of ice on each of the branches of the trees, and
our
school was shut down for
at
least 3 weeks.
It's amazing. I'm sure there were more. There was only one death around here. Thank God. It looked a lot worse than it actually was, but millions of dollars, and it was just one of those things. The other thing that we haven't talked about is the 800-pound gorilla in the room is the water levels. Where do we go from here? Are they taking too much out up at Waddington at the dam, or where do we go from here? And what does it look like to you up there for this season?
It sounds like the IJC may have let too much out, but they're in a tough position because they don't know the rainfall or how heavy the snow is going to be in the winter. So I think those guys are in a very tough position. It's such a slow process, Glenn. I think in November or December, they were letting more out in anticipation of heavier snow this winter.
Right.
That didn't really materialize. It was a fairly dry, light snow in the Great Lakes Basin. So it is a huge problem now. Now I can still get my Sea-Doos out, but we had one over at the Island 3 weeks ago, and it's even sea-doos don't draw much water, but the water is so shallow there. It draws a stick into it, and then we've got the damn stick out of the intake of the sea-doo. It's a real pain.
It's dangerous. Yeah.
Yep.
And I haven't put the Boston Whaler is going to go in the next few days. And I've hit shoals before, and I'm always embarrassed because at 60 years of age, I should know every darn shoal in this part of the St. Lawrence River. And I still have hit them in the past few years. And there are more shoals now than there have ever been because, of course, the water is so low. So it's going to be a very tough summer. And I worry that if it gets lower, as it usually does in August, that we'll be high and dry. We won't be able to get boats into our lifts.
Does that affect the channel? Does that affect the seaway as far as the large ships are concerned, the pilots, when it gets that low?
It does, in the sense that they have to carry lighter loads if the water gets too low, and they can't just sort of close it up down at Iroquois Locks or where the dam is, because they've got to feed enough water into Montreal to keep Montreal Harbor open. So you got all these different interest groups who, the fishermen, the boaters, the tourists, the Port of Montreal, navigation, and it's a real mess. Just like when we had too much water, you just open the floodgates, let it all out. Well, that would put Montreal underwater.
Right, exactly.
You're trading off sort of the south side of Lake Ontario and all the people from Rochester up to sort of Watertown on the lake there, trading off their interests versus the Montreal Harbor and the people downstream. So it's a very tough task for those scientists to figure out. And I'm no expert. I just sort of read the articles that you probably read as well. Mm-hmm. But it's really sad how low that water is. I think navigation is fine for now, but if it gets much lower, it does become an issue.
It does.
But I find it interesting that we're expecting people to forecast rainfall and snow melt from all the way up in Lake Superior, because that lake affects everything down the line from all the Great Lakes. And like you said, affecting Montreal, and you have the fishermen that depend on that, and the marinas, and then the Seaway Development Corporation. Everyone's got a hand in it, and Save the River as well. So they want the wetlands to be protected, and they've jockeyed for that position for years too. So I please everybody.
I just wonder if the right people are making the decisions. I mean, if people are actually letting out too much water in anticipation of a heavy snow load, for instance, in that December, January, February framework, and then they miscalculate, then it's too late. You can't get the water back.
Right.
So, going forward, I mean, we're talking about a lot of great things, people flocking up here because of the post-COVID era, so to speak. We're not there yet. But then all of a sudden, we don't have any water.
When I read Plan 2014, because I ran for a higher office a year back or so, I wanted to know a little bit. I wanted to know a little bit more than the average Joe about it.
Right.
All the statistics that they used was from basically when the Seaway was finished in 1958 until about 1996. So Plan 2014 was put into effect essentially after the statistics ended. And in the plan, they specifically say this does not account for any difference in forecasting for the future.
Right.
This is just what's happened in the past.
Right.
So the statistics they were working off, because government on this side of the river, I'm sure it's on that side of the river too, Derek, works so slow.
Yeah.
They started talking about Plan 2014 in 1996 using their statistics. Cracks me up.
Right.
In the plan, it says this does not account for any future, water levels. Well, we're looking at climate change right now.
Derek, do you have any insight into that? Why are we regulating it so much?
I don't know what the real reason is. I think it's just to balance all the interests who are upstream of where they can, upstream and downstream from where they regulate that water. And it's just a slow process. You can't just open a spigot and let it out like a bathtub. It's a very, very slow process of draining the lakes. It's like is it an inch a week or something like that, or not even. It's very, very.
I'll give it to the IJC. They did some really good, like when we had the big problems in 2019. They had like a group going around to local municipalities giving these explanations. If you looked at like the levels of the water before 1958, it was like, I don't know if you can see me or not, Derek, but it was pretty big. It was like a good, like if I'm trying to do a little diagram here, it's about a foot of the highest and the lowest points in the river. And then after 1958, when they put in the dams, they did the Seaway and all that stuff, it's the same thing, but it's like you shrunk it down. So you still have those highs and those lows, but it's not as big because we're playing Mother Nature, right? We're doing as much as we can to make it more level. And so I guess I understand that, but I think the crazy thing for us was that it happened in 2017, and it was a 1 in 100 year flood or something like that,
Yeah.
and then it happened 2 years later.
Yeah, and 2 years later.
Exactly, and that's how the governor explained it when I was in Clayton, and he was giving his speech about the money that he gave us. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Governor, for our $11 million that we got.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's what he was talking about, was that there was these 2 floods that were, the first time we said it was a 1 in 100 year, and this was a 1 in 1,000 year, and now we both had them almost back to back.
Yeah,
So
right.
something's wrong here.
Yeah, something is very wrong
So
there.
let's fix it.
Well, Derek, I tell you, this has been great. What can you share with us as a closing comment about the future of the river? I mean, I know obviously the struggle is to keep the water levels high, but now that the fishing is bigger and better and recognized nationally, or for that matter, internationally, more tournaments, and what is the future of the river on both sides of the border, in your opinion, Derek?
I think it's very positive. I mean, it's fishing, it's vacationing, it's second homes for families who are spending more and more time here in the new environment where they can work remotely. I mean, to Alex's point in the last podcast of brain gain, because normally we talk about brain drain, and in these communities, both sides of the river over the years. Brockville is in the process of losing its Procter & Gamble plant, which is tough on the area, but other businesses are going so well. They're hiring, and it's hard to find employees. And I'm hearing more and more stories about people moving back. I think it's very positive. It's one of the most beautiful spots on the planet, and year round. Certainly, it's the second homes, but it's also establishing viable industry to keep this place, these communities alive. 12 months of the year, not just 4 months of the year. And I think that there's a trend in that direction.
Derek, thank you so much for joining us. I'll just apologize for all Americans and say we're sorry that we get the sunsets instead of you.
That's right. You have the most gorgeous sunsets on your side. And American Island actually gets the sunrise and sunset.
Derek, thank you very much for being with us today.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We want to thank Derek for taking the time to share his stories about the St. Lawrence River. We hope you enjoyed it. Remember to watch for more episodes with the guys as they tackle everything there is to know about the greatest river in the world. I'm Lori Doldo. We'll see you on the next episode of The River, Living the St. Lawrence.